My name is Eloan Kale. I am 34 years old. Until this morning I thought I understood what family really meant. I live in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building in Baltimore. I have been managing this building for many years. My grandmother worked very hard on it her whole life. The radiator hums in the winter, making little noises that sound like it is singing. The stairs creak when you step on them. Some people might find it annoying, but for me this is home. It is home for everyone who lives here too, people I've watched grow up, people I've helped, people I've learned from. This morning my sister came into my apartment without knocking. She dropped a folded piece of paper on my kitchen table. On it, in very neat letters, was a number, $8,100. My rent, which had been $2,350, was now going to more than 4 times that. She didn't even have to say anything. The way she smiled told me she was enjoying watching me read it and understand what it meant. Later my parents called. They explained why this huge rent increase was fair. They used words like opportunity, investment, and appreciation. They talked as if it was just business, as if everything was normal. But what they didn't understand was that no regular person living in this building could afford this much money and still live here. They said my low rent had been a favor, and that favors don't last forever. They didn't know that I had a secret. For the last 4 years, I had been more than just the woman who fixes broken sinks and leaky pipes. Because of my grandmother, I had something hidden away that could completely change everything. It could even show my sister that the power she thought she had over me was only an illusion. Before I continue further, don't forget to subscribe and join the awesome community. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what you think of the story. By late afternoon I felt tired in a way I had never felt before. The day felt heavy. I picked up my phone and called someone I thought might understand me, someone who had known me my whole life. But the moment I heard my mother's voice, I realized just how uneven and unfair the ground beneath me really was. She spoke calmly, politely, and with a polished certainty. Her words left no room for questions. She told me that these changes were necessary. She said I should let my sister handle things because that is what successful people do. Then my father joined the call. He sounded calm, steady, and dismissive, almost like a robot. It was as if the decision had been made long before I ever knew anything about it. They weren't angry, not in the way you might expect. But there was something colder than anger in their tone. Everything they said framed me as the obstacle, not the one being crushed. I ended the call feeling hollow. I walked outside my apartment. The hallway was alive with quiet movement. Doors opened and closed. People walked slowly. In a building like mine, news spreads fast, especially when it affects where people live. Mrs. Ondine stood near the stairs. Her hands shook as she held an envelope. Her face was scared. She had lived here for almost all her adult life, long before I became the manager. Seeing the fear in her eyes hurt me more than anything my family had said. Across the hall, Mr. Zeffin leaned heavily on his walker. He was breathing hard and repeating numbers under his breath, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. Farther down, the Kim family was packing small toys into a cardboard box. Their little daughter asked questions they didn't know how to answer. There was no shouting. There was no chaos. Just a quiet, heavy fear. People avoided my eyes not because they blamed me but because hope itself felt fragile. They didn't ask me who had made this decision. They only asked if they still had time to stay. I tried to say comforting words but they got stuck in my throat. I have had moments in my life when I felt powerless, but this was different. This was the first time I felt the weight of so many people's lives pressing down on me. I wasn't just losing something. They were losing everything, and it was all connected to me. Then there was a soft knock on my door. I turned and saw Celine Corvin. She didn't wait for greetings or pleasantries. She stepped inside calmly, folded her scarf neatly, and looked at me with an intensity that made me feel both nervous and safe at the same time. Celine had known my grandmother very well, far better than most of my relatives. Her gaze carried certainty. She had come not to feel sorry for me but with purpose. Celine spoke quietly, yet every word felt important. She reminded me of little things from the past, small moments that seemed insignificant at the time. She said my grandmother had always worried about my sister Saphira's ambition. She said it had always been strong like a badge, but it was slowly turning cold and calculated. Then she said something that made my heart pound. Celine told me that my grandmother didn't trust keeping all her important papers in obvious places. Sometimes she hid them in secret spots. Only someone who truly paid attention to her habits would ever find them. Celine believed these hidden things were meant for me, not for anyone else. She spoke calmly, like she was giving me direction rather than a promise. Before leaving, Celine touched my arm gently. She didn't give me answers. She just left me with the knowledge that my grandmother had prepared something for a moment like this, something that could help me if I knew where to look. The next morning, I felt a clarity that pushed me into action. I went downstairs carrying a ring of old keys my grandmother had given me long ago. I had never thought much about them before, but now they felt important. The basement door was metal and stuck in the frame because of the humidity. I had to lean against it with my shoulder before it finally opened. A faint smell of dust and old paint floated toward me as I stepped inside. The basement looked the same as it always had. There were stacked boxes from old tenants, bundles of cords, and the low hum of the boiler vibrating through the pipes. But this time, everything in the basement seemed to matter. Shadows felt meaningful. I moved slowly, touching shelves, remembering afternoons spent with my grandmother helping her sort holiday decorations or old tools. She had always said the basement was the heart of the building. Messy, overlooked, but it held everything together. I traced the shelves with my fingers until I felt the edge of her small sewing cabinet. It was a little thing that she never wanted to get rid of, even though the drawers no longer glided smoothly. I pushed it aside and noticed a faint crack in one of the floorboards. The lines were too straight to be normal. I knelt down and lifted the board. Beneath it sat a small, heavy weatherproof box. My heart beat fast as I lifted it. I carefully opened it. Inside were folders tied with rubber bands, sealed envelopes, and a metal tin that rattled. I opened the tin first. It held a set of keys and a note in my grandmother's handwriting. Her message was simple but strong. She had known I would need this one day. Then I opened the first folder. My world shifted. These weren't old, sentimental papers. They were official, structured, important documents. On top was the operating agreement for Kale Heritage LLC. And on it my name was written clearly as the sole owner. My grandmother had guided me through this paperwork years ago, when I thought I was only helping with ordinary management tasks. But really she had been giving me ownership of the building all along. Another folder contained printed emails between my sister Saphira and Colin Reeves of Reeves Urban Capital. Their emails were careful and professional but revealed their plans. They discussed the building's value, the tenants, and ways to make money quickly. Reading these emails made my stomach twist. People like Mr. Zeffin and the Kim family were not people to them. They were just numbers on a spreadsheet, obstacles to be removed. The urgency in the emails made it clear they wanted to get things done fast, no matter who was hurt. Then I opened an envelope with a letter written by my grandmother. The ink was faded and the edges curled, but her voice came through clearly. She wrote about her fear that the people she trusted would not care for the building the way she did. She wanted to make sure I had the tools, the ownership, and the knowledge to protect it. She had planned ahead, knowing that one day I might face a challenge like this. I felt a mixture of shock, sadness, and strength. My grandmother had left me everything I needed to take care of the building, to protect the people who lived there, and to stand up to my sister and anyone else who thought they could push me aside. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on my shoulders, but this time it didn't crush me. It gave me purpose. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just think about myself anymore. I had to protect the families who trusted me, the elderly people like Mrs. Ondine, the struggling families like the Kims, and even Mr. Zeffin, who muttered numbers to himself like a secret code. I went back upstairs, the folders and envelopes clutched tightly in my arms. I walked through the hallway past my neighbors who were still whispering and packing quietly. This time when they saw me, they didn't look at me with fear. They looked at me with hope. I could feel their trust and their reliance on me, and it gave me courage. I realized my grandmother's plan was more than clever. It was about love. She loved this building, the people in it, and me. She had known that one day someone would try to take control, and she had prepared me to be ready. She had given me ownership not just of property, but of the trust and respect of everyone who lived here. I knew what I had to do next. I would review all the documents carefully. I would learn everything about Kale Heritage LLC, about the rules, the rights, and the powers I had as the owner. And then I would face my sister and my parents. I would make it clear that this building, this home, and these people mattered more than money. I would show them that I was no longer powerless. I was ready. The basement, the hidden box, the letters, the keys. It all connected. My grandmother had left me a trail, a map, and a shield. I was finally holding it in my hands, and I knew that I had the power to protect my building and the people in it. For the first time since I had read that horrible notice from my sister, I felt a sense of control. Not arrogance. Not revenge. Control. I was not just the manager anymore. I was the owner, and I had a responsibility to use that power wisely like my grandmother would have wanted. I spent the rest of the day reading the documents and letters again and again. Every sentence, every signature, every word mattered. I made notes. I made plans. I thought about the families, the tenants, and what my grandmother had sacrificed to keep this building safe. I understood now that my grandmother had been preparing me for this moment for years, teaching me patience, observation, and care. All the small chores I had done, all the maintenance work, all the interactions with the tenants, they were training for this very challenge. That night, I looked out of my apartment window at the quiet streets of Baltimore. The city lights flickered, and I could hear the soft hum of the radiator in my apartment. I thought about the families in my building. I thought about my grandmother who had built this place with love and care. I thought about the power my sister thought she had. And I made a promise to myself and to my grandmother. I would protect this building, I would protect the people in it, and I would never let greed or selfishness destroy what she had built. I went to bed that night with a mixture of fear, determination, and hope. I was ready for the challenge. I had the documents, the keys, and my grandmother's guidance. I had the trust of the people in the building, and most importantly, I had the courage to stand up. The next morning I would begin. I would face my sister, my parents, and anyone else who tried to take control. But I would do it with the strength my grandmother had given me, the knowledge she had hidden for me, and the love for the building and its people that had been passed down through generations. She worried that being too ambitious might make her forget what was right, and that being kind might make others think she was weak. She wrote that she saw people as real people, not just numbers, and that this mattered more than anyone knew. Then she explained her decision quietly without making a big fuss, so the building would be safe and not end up in the wrong hands. Her trust in me felt heavy on my chest, both comforting and scary. I hadn't asked for any of this, but she had given me her most important responsibility. I closed the letter and sat on the cool concrete floor trying to calm down. Nothing felt simple anymore. But under the weight there was something sharp and steady. Purpose. I gathered all the papers into a neat stack and put them in my bag. There was one more thing I had to do now that I knew the truth. My grandmother had trusted only one lawyer with her estate, a man she respected for being careful and loyal. His name came to my mind like she had whispered it. Caspian Rook. If anyone could explain what she had done, it would be him. I climbed the stairs, holding the box tightly, my fingers brushing the worn railing she had once held. For the first time in days, the way forward didn't feel like falling apart, but like a secret waiting to be understood. By the afternoon, the next step was clear. I drove across town to a small brick building between a bakery and a travel shop. I had never been there before, but I knew it immediately. The glass door said, Law Office of Caspian Rook. My grandmother had trusted very few people with important things, and Caspian was one of them. The weight of the documents in my bag reminded me why I needed someone who understood them better than I did. Inside, the waiting room smelled like polished wood and citrus cleaner. It felt tidy, like my grandmother's handwriting, neat and careful. A receptionist told me to wait, and soon Caspian Rook appeared. He looked to be about 60, with silver hair neatly combed back and a calm face, like he had expected me. I handed him the folders without saying anything. He looked at them, his face moving from recognition to focus. He read fast, flipping pages like he already knew what he would find. My grandmother had prepared him. He paused at the letter she wrote to me, taking a deep breath that sounded both sad and proud. Then he neatly arranged the papers before talking. He explained everything carefully, using legal words I didn't fully understand, but he seemed sure of it. He told me how the building's ownership had been set up years ago, how Kale Heritage LC worked separately from my family's trusts, and how the papers I signed gave me control without anyone noticing. He said my grandmother had created layers. One for everyone to see, one for private use, and one just for me through the papers she wanted me to find in my own time. The LLC gave me full control over the building, the money it earned, and its future. My sister, Saphira, only had power because she thought the old trust was in charge, but legally she couldn't make changes without my permission. The rent increase she wanted to force had no real power, only the ability to scare people. Hearing this from someone outside the family made my heart steady more than I expected. Caspian then showed me financial records that tracked money going to redevelopment companies long before Saphira's rent idea. He didn't get angry, but the clear way he explained it made it obvious that something wrong had been happening. The losses were big enough that auditors might notice, and my grandmother had kept the papers to show exactly what was happening. She had planned for Saphira to push too far and had evidence ready. When he finished, the room went quiet. Caspian folded his hands and said that my next choices would decide the building's future and what my family thought about who was in charge. He told me to keep records safe, write down everything that happened with Saphira, and be ready if she tried to pressure residents again. His advice was practical, based on years of experience with buildings and communities. I realized my grandmother had picked him not just because he was smart, but because he was steady, someone who saw the bigger picture. He pulled out a binder with my name on it. Inside, my grandmother had written a timeline of steps she wanted me to follow if needed. It wasn't strict instructions, but it gave me guidance, a reminder that she saw potential in me before I saw it in myself. It also explained why she hadn't confronted Saphira directly. She knew it was better to let the truth come out naturally rather than arguing. Leaving the office, the sunlight felt brighter on my skin. The binder felt like a quiet judgment, not against my sister but against the wrong ideas that had shaped our family for years. I walked to my car feeling surprised by the clarity. The building wasn't just a place for people to live. It was a responsibility carefully given to me whether I asked for it or not. By the end of the week, the tension in the building felt ready to explode. The hallways were quiet, and the residents seemed to wait for something to happen. The shift came early one morning with loud footsteps on the stairs and the hollow sound of a clipboard hitting the railing. I stepped outside and saw my sister leading 3 men in suits, each holding papers. Saphira walked in front, confident, her heels clicking loudly. She didn't look at me or anyone else, just pointed to apartments like she was in charge. Her face tried to look strong, but it felt fake. Behind her, the men scanned the hall like it wasn't their place. The hallway felt tense, and Saphira seemed to enjoy the feeling of control. She handed one man a folder and told him to start checking apartments. She had no right, but it didn't matter. She was performing for an audience. What Saphira didn't see was that the building had already started to come together on its own. The night before, residents had met in the community room with Vespera Linnea, a housing counselor from a local nonprofit. Vespera spoke calmly, explaining tenant rights, documenting rules, and making sure everyone knew how to protect themselves. By the end, residents who felt alone were united. Now the doors opened slowly. Residents stood together, arms crossed, phones ready to record. There was no anger, only a quiet determination. The men in suits hesitated at the cameras. Their confidence wavered, and one glanced at Saphira for guidance. Her jaw tightened, but she pushed forward, saying, "They continue." The first inspection was in Mrs. Ondine's apartment. She stood by the door with Vespera, giving quiet reassurance. The men checked for problems that weren't there. Everything was clean and fine. Saphira hovered, waiting to find something wrong, but there was nothing. Next was the Kim family's apartment. Same story, everything in order. The men's questions became shorter, unsure. After finishing, they stepped into the hallway where residents watched calmly. Saphira's confidence shrank with each step. By the last apartment, the inspection was pointless. The men seemed ready to leave, murmuring to Saphira, who ignored them. Her face hardened, brittle. She announced a family meeting at Uncle Steve's office the next day to resolve ownership issues. She acted like she still had power. The inspection team left and the building returned to quiet. But under the calm was a new feeling: confidence. The residents knew Saphira's attempt to scare them had failed. I closed my door and put the binder from Caspian on my desk. The inspection didn't reveal anything about the building, but it showed everything about my sister's drive to control it. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't be about rules or management. It would be a reckoning, something she didn't know she had already started. The next morning felt heavy. Clouds hung low as I drove to Uncle Steve's office. The building stood in a business area full of small offices, where papers mattered more than people. It seemed right for what was about to happen. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked in with Caspian's binder under my arm. Inside, my sister was already there, sitting straight in her navy blazer, looking like she had won even before anything started. I paused in the doorway, feeling the binder press against me like a shield. Saphira glanced up, her eyes sharp as if daring me to speak. Uncle Steve looked at both of us, his face calm but serious, like someone who had seen many family arguments over the years. He gestured for me to sit, and I carefully placed the binder on the table in front of me. Sapphira began to speak quickly, her voice full of authority. "We need to resolve the ownership of the building immediately. There are structural and management issues that must be addressed, and I will lead the process." She sounded sure of herself, but I could see the slightest flicker of doubt in her eyes when she looked at me. I opened the binder slowly and flipped to the first page. "Before we talk about leadership," I said softly but clearly, "we need to understand the facts." I handed the binder to Uncle Steve. The weight of it seemed to impress him, and he nodded as he opened it. Pages filled with neat handwriting, financial documents, and letters from my grandmother made the room feel alive with history. As Uncle Steve read, I explained what Caspian had told me, how the LLC worked, how Sapphira had no real authority to enforce the rent increase, and how the documents proved that my grandmother had trusted me with responsibility. Each word felt like a small step forward, and I could see Sapphira's confident expression begin to falter. Uncle Steve asked questions calmly, flipping pages and pointing to notes. I answered as best I could, my voice steady. I realized that speaking slowly, clearly, and honestly was more powerful than shouting or arguing. Sapphira tried to interrupt, but Uncle Steve gently asked her to wait, and the room stayed quiet except for the turning of pages. The more the binder was reviewed, the more the truth became clear. Sapphira's attempts to control the building had been based on misunderstanding and false assumptions. My grandmother's foresight had created a safety net, ensuring that the building would stay under responsible hands. Mine. Sapphira's face went from determination to frustration to something softer: confusion. She realized that she had been acting with authority she didn't have. The papers, the letters, and the legal explanations had quietly shown her and everyone else what was real. She tried to speak, but Uncle Steve, with a calm voice, said, "The documents show that the decisions now rest with your sister. We must respect her role and the intentions of your grandmother." Sapphira sat back silent. The room felt heavier for her but lighter for everyone else. Residents, if they had been present, would have seen the shift in power. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was complete. My grandmother's careful planning had worked exactly as she had intended. When the meeting ended, I left Uncle Steve's office with a sense of clarity I had never known before. The binder felt lighter in my hands now, not just because I understood the responsibility, but because I understood the trust behind it. My grandmother had not just left me papers. She had left me guidance, faith, and a path forward. Driving back to the building, I thought about the residents and the quiet strength they had shown. They were no longer waiting for someone to save them. They were ready to stand together, to protect their homes, and to honor the responsibility my grandmother had entrusted to me. The building was more than just bricks and money. It was a community, a responsibility, and a living lesson in trust and foresight. By the time I returned, the hallways felt warmer, calmer. I could hear neighbors talking softly to one another, confident that their homes were safe. I walked through the lobby, touching the familiar walls, feeling the weight of the past and the hope of the future. For the first time, I truly felt like I belonged, not just in the building but in the role my grandmother had prepared me for. Sitting at my desk, I opened the binder one more time. I read through the letters, the notes, and the financial records. Each page reminded me that responsibility was not just about rules or money, but about care, foresight, and courage. I realized that my grandmother had given me not just control, but the wisdom to guide it wisely. That evening, as the sun set and the building grew quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. There would still be challenges: Sapphira's frustrations, the ongoing needs of residents, and the careful management of the building, but I was ready. With the binder, the guidance of Caspian Rook, and the lessons of my grandmother, I knew I could face anything. And for the first time, the building didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a home, mine but also everyone else's, and I understood that protecting it meant protecting the people who lived there, not just the walls that held them. My parents were standing by the big windows, talking quietly in low voices. When I walked into the room, they stopped talking right away. They looked at me in a strange way, like they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Their faces showed both hope and worry, as if they were expecting something to happen but were not sure what. I could feel their eyes on me, heavy with questions they didn't ask out loud. Sapphira, my older sister, didn't even try to hide that she was sure she would win. She looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they think they already solved. Her face had a small, confident smile, like she knew everything would go her way. Uncle Steve greeted us politely with a smile that didn't feel warm. He motioned for everyone to go into the conference room, which was large and serious. A long oak table took up most of the room and folders were neatly placed at each chair. In the middle of the table sat a picture of calm water. Nobody touched it. The room felt like it had been ready for this important meeting for a very long time, like it had been waiting for something big to happen. I sat down across from Saphira and gently placed a big binder on the table. I haven't opened it yet. Saphira's eyes followed my every move. Her smile tightened a little as she narrowed her eyes at me. Uncle Steve began talking first. He spoke about changes to the building, about ways to make it more valuable, and about the money we could make if investors were involved. He sounded calm and professional, but his words seemed to support Saphira's ideas perfectly. It was almost as if he had practiced saying exactly what she wanted him to say. Then Saphira started talking. She said that the building was not doing as well as it could. She showed fancy papers with numbers, charts, and plans. She spoke about buyouts, timelines, and estimated profits. Her voice was clear and confident, like she knew everyone would agree with her. My parents nodded along. They said that keeping the family together meant following Saphira's plan. But something about their words didn't feel real. It sounded like they were just saying what they thought they should say. I looked at my parents closely. My mom tried to smile, but it seemed forced. My dad's jaw was tight. I felt a distance between us, a space created by years of choices and expectations. Our family had always been about who was in charge, and Saphira had always been at the center of it. The room became quiet as they finished talking. Everyone seemed to be waiting for me to agree. For a moment, the silence felt heavier than the papers on the table. Then I opened the binder. The first set of papers slid onto the table with a soft sound. I spoke calmly. I told everyone that Kale Heritage LLC owned the building completely, and that I was the only owner. At the top of the stack was the agreement signed by my grandmother and me. Saphira's confident face changed. Her eyes widened and her smile disappeared. She looked at the papers like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. My parents looked confused, their certainty slipping away. I put the financial records on the table next. These papers showed money Saphira had taken from the building's funds and put into companies she controlled. Each number was clear, showing exactly how the money had been moved. I explained what it all meant, keeping my voice calm and steady. I didn't need to yell or get angry. The papers told the story themselves. The binder also included bills for repairs that were never done, fake consulting fees, and monthly transfers to companies that didn't need the money. Then I placed the last papers on the table. They were emails between Saphira and someone named Colin Reeves. The emails talked about ways to make tenants leave the building faster and prepare it for new development. Saphira's face went pale. The plan she had been so confident about was now visible to everyone. The room was silent. My parents didn't know what to say. Saphira tried to speak, but her words failed. She looked panicked. This time the silence didn't come from waiting. It came from knowing that the truth was right there and no one could ignore it. Then there was a knock at the door. Caspian Rook stepped inside, calm and serious. Behind him was an investigator from the city attorney's office, holding a slim folder. The investigator introduced himself politely and said he needed to discuss financial problems connected to managing the building. He didn't yell or threaten, but his voice carried authority. Saphira's face showed shock and fear. She looked around the room hoping for a way out, but there wasn't one. My parents were frozen in place, unsure what to do next. Weeks went by before everything came together in a courtroom downtown. The building felt cold, even with sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The air was quiet and heavy, full of tension. I sat behind the rail with the binder on my lap, even though I didn't need it anymore. Every document, every number, every fact had already become clear in my mind. This wasn't about shocking anyone anymore. It was about the truth standing strong no matter what. The hearing began. The judge read out the charges carefully. Saphira had taken money from the building and pressured tenants to leave unfairly. The prosecutor presented each piece of evidence calmly, showing exactly what Saphira had done. I watched Saphira at the defense table. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her confidence had disappeared under the bright, serious lights of the courtroom. Witnesses were called. Mrs. Ondine spoke about surprise notices and how scared the tenants felt. The Kim family explained how their daughter had to worry about leaving her school suddenly. Even Mr. Zeffin, leaning on his walker, described the pressure he felt to leave the building. The witnesses didn't sound angry. They sounded tired, worn out by the unfair treatment Safira had caused. Finally, it was my turn to speak. The judge asked me questions about my role, the documents, and my grandmother's plans. I answered clearly and calmly. My grandmother had planned everything carefully to protect the building and the people in it. Saying her name in the courtroom made me feel stronger, like she was with me. The judge and everyone listening understood the facts clearly, and the story fit together perfectly. In the end, Safira was found guilty. She had to go to jail for what she did. The judge said that her actions had hurt tenants and were done on purpose. Safira didn't shout, cry, or argue. She just looked at what had happened, realizing that her choices had led her to this place. After the hearing, my parents came to me. Their faces were full of worry, confusion, and a little regret. They asked if I wanted to talk. I said no. There were no arguments, no raised voices. I walked past them without looking back. Outside, the air felt fresh and bright. The city went on with cars, people talking, and a train rumbling in the distance. Everything had changed for me, but the city felt normal. I went to the building my grandmother had protected. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the sunlight bounce off the windows. Each window told a story of people who had faced uncertainty together. In the following weeks, I worked with Vespera Linnea to fix the building. We made sure rents were fair, repairs were done, and tenants didn't have to worry about losing their homes. People didn't throw a party to celebrate. They just smiled, said hello, and opened doors to let fresh air in. Step by step, the building became steady and calm again. Late one evening, I stood at the entrance and listened to the quiet. The building wasn't perfect. It never had been. But it was honest, and it was ours. My grandmother's real gift wasn't the building itself. It was showing me how to stand strong, protect what mattered, and do the right thing even when I had to stand alone. The lesson was simple. Families aren't just about who you are related to. Families are about doing the right thing, protecting people, and being honest. Sometimes being loyal means not following someone who is hurting others, even if they are your own family. True loyalty comes from protecting what is right, not just agreeing with someone who is wrong. I often think about the building and the people who live there. Every creaking step of the stairs, every door, every window reminds me of how important it is to care for others and to make sure that everyone is safe. The building is alive in a way, full of stories and lessons. People's lives continued, but now they felt steadier, safer, and happier because honesty and care had finally returned. Every time I walked through the halls, I could feel the difference. The steps no longer made me anxious. The sound of children playing, neighbors chatting, and doors opening made the building feel warm and alive. The building may not have been perfect, but it was real, and it belonged to the people who lived there. That is what mattered most. And that is how my grandmother's legacy lived on. Not just through papers and buildings, but through courage, honesty, and the quiet strength to do the right thing even when it was hard.